Imagine pouring every ounce of your energy, time, and resources into building a dream company, only to watch it collapse before your eyes. Think about what it feels like when society labels you a failure, when friends whisper doubts, and even your own mind begins to question your worth. Now picture rising from the ashes of that defeat, not only to rebuild your life, but to create something even greater, something the world will remember as a billion-dollar success story. Failure has a unique sting. It cuts deep, not just into finances and reputation, but into identity. When a startup collapses, it isn't simply a business closing. It feels like the death of a vision. For many entrepreneurs, especially in America where risk-taking is celebrated but results are demanded, this is the moment that separates those who quietly fade away from those who harness resilience as fuel. The story we're diving into today is not just about failure, but about transformation, grit, and the relentless pursuit of a second chance. It's a case study of a US entrepreneur who lost nearly everything, stood on the brink of despair, and still managed to write one of the most remarkable comeback stories in modern business. At first glance, it looked like the perfect startup tale. The entrepreneur, a young visionary filled with confidence, convinced investors to back his ambitious idea. The pitch was sleek, the product innovative, and the market seemed ready to explode. For a time, it looked like nothing could go wrong. The media praised him as a rising star in tech, interviews flowed in, and early customers showed excitement. But like so many startups that begin with promise, cracks appeared faster than expected. The burn rate outpaced revenue. Customer retention was weak. Competition grew fierce. Worse, leadership mistakes started to surface. The company, once touted as the next big thing, collapsed under the weight of mismanagement and external pressures. When the dust settled, he was left with a pile of debt, a bruised ego, and a reputation that felt beyond repair. Former employees resented him. Investors were angry. Friends and family whispered, questioning whether he had been reckless or naive. For many, this would be the end. It's not uncommon for entrepreneurs to walk away forever after such a defeat. The shame can be unbearable, and the fear of repeating mistakes can paralyze any future attempts. But this story is different. Instead of accepting the label of failure, he chose to view the collapse as his greatest classroom. He began dissecting every decision, every misstep, every overconfidence that had led to downfall. He didn't sugarcoat the truth, he owned it. Resilience doesn't mean pretending pain doesn't exist. It means confronting it, extracting lessons, and then carrying those lessons into the next battle. Slowly, he started writing down patterns of what had gone wrong. Overhiring too quickly, ignoring customer feedback, chasing investor money instead of sustainable growth, failing to adapt to the competition. These weren't abstract reflections. They were concrete mistakes that could be avoided in the future. What's remarkable is that he didn't simply repeat the same dream in a different package. He redefined his entire approach. Instead of chasing vanity metrics, he obsessed over customer value. Instead of aiming for flashy media coverage, he built quietly and tested relentlessly. Instead of seeking validation through rapid funding rounds, he focused on building a business model that could sustain itself without constant outside cash. He began small, humbler than before, but sharper and wiser. That humility, born from failure, became his secret weapon. The second venture was nothing like the first in its execution. He built it in phases, carefully scaling only when the foundation proved solid. Every mistake from the first venture became a guiding principle in the second. When he considered hiring, he remembered the chaos of bloated payrolls and instead chose lean, versatile team members who could adapt to multiple roles. When competitors launched aggressive campaigns, he resisted the panic-driven urge to mimic them, and instead doubled down on what his company did uniquely well. When investors approached, he accepted funds strategically rather than desperately, ensuring that each partnership aligned with long-term vision rather than short-term hype. Slowly, the new company began to grow. It didn't explode overnight, it matured piece by piece, each milestone built on the hard lessons of failure. Customers who felt unheard in the first business now became central voices in shaping the product. Employees who joined appreciated the deliberate pace, knowing they were building something sustainable. Investors who once walked away began noticing again, but this time the narrative was different. He wasn't the naive dreamer anymore. He was the resilient leader who had walked through fire and returned sharper. The American entrepreneurial culture loves a comeback story, and this one began to capture attention. Media outlets reframed him not as a failure, but as a symbol of persistence. Other entrepreneurs looked to him as proof that even the most humiliating collapse doesn't have to define the end of a career. The same public that once criticized him began to admire his grit. With each passing year, the company grew stronger, expanding its customer base, refining its product, and eventually entering the elusive status of $1 billion valuation. What's most inspiring is not the financial success itself, but the transformation of mindset that made it possible. The first company was fueled by ambition, ego, and external validation. The second was fueled by resilience, humility, and a deep commitment to value. Failure, as painful as it was, reshaped him into a leader who could see beyond short-term moments. He learned that resilience is not just bouncing back, it's bouncing forward, using setbacks as springboards to a higher level of wisdom and execution. This story resonates because it reflects a universal truth. Every one of us faces failure in some form. For entrepreneurs, it may be a failed startup. For others, it could be a career setback, a broken relationship, or a missed opportunity. The temptation is always to interpret failure as final, as proof that we aren't good enough. But resilience redefines the narrative. Failure is not a verdict, it's feedback. It's a mirror that shows us where we need to grow. The difference between those who stay down and those who rise lies not in talent or luck, but in mindset. In the US, there's a phrase often repeated in business circles: fail fast, fail forward. It captures the cultural embrace of mistakes as stepping stones. But the deeper truth is that failure only fuels growth when it is examined honestly. The entrepreneur in this case study didn't just dust himself off and try again with blind optimism. He became a student of his own downfall. That willingness to face uncomfortable truths made him capable of building something far more powerful the second time around. It's also worth noting that resilience is not just individual, it's communal. In his comeback journey, mentors played a role. Former competitors offered advice. Even some investors who had once lost money chose to back him again. Not because they forgot the failure, but because they saw the transformation. Resilience can inspire trust, and trust opens doors that failure alone might have closed permanently. By the time his second company reached unicorn status, his reputation had completely transformed. He was no longer remembered as the man who failed, but as the man who proved failure could be fuel. His story was taught in business schools, analyzed in case studies, and celebrated as a reminder that resilience is not optional in the entrepreneurial journey. It is essential. For anyone listening or watching today, the takeaway is simple but profound. If you are in the middle of a setback, whether personal or professional, remember that failure is not the end of your story. It may be the painful beginning of your greatest chapter. The key lies in your willingness to pause, reflect, and rebuild with wisdom. Resilient mindsets are not born, they are forged in the fire of difficulty. And as this story shows, that fire, as destructive as it feels, can also be the crucible that prepares you for greatness. Failure will visit all of us. What matters is whether we let it define us or refine us. The entrepreneur who turned his failed startup into a billion-dollar company chose refinement, resilience, and relentless forward motion. That choice is available to you too. It doesn't guarantee ease, but it guarantees growth. And growth, more than any single victory, is the true measure of success. Failure, for all its sting, leaves behind a kind of blueprint. It sketches out where we fell short, where blind spots consumed us, and where opportunities slipped through unnoticed. In the story of the American entrepreneur who turned a failed startup into a billion-dollar comeback, the real magic of part 2 lies not in the collapse itself, but in what he did after. The deliberate, disciplined steps that transform lessons into lasting success. The truth is, most people walk away from failure carrying scars, but never wisdom. He refused to let that be his story. He treated failure like data, dissecting every element until it became fuel for the next venture. One of the first realizations he faced was about speed. In the first company, speed had been treated as a badge of honor. Hiring quickly was framed as aggressive growth. Raising large amounts of capital fast was considered proof of potential. Expanding into new markets at lightning pace was interpreted as being ahead of the curve. But speed without stability is like building a skyscraper on sand. It might rise quickly, but it collapses just as fast. This time he slowed down. He built with patience, knowing that true resilience means resisting the temptation of premature glory. Instead of trying to impress the market with press releases and flashy partnerships, he invested in foundation, customer research, product refinement, and careful financial planning. Another critical shift came in his relationship with investors. In the early days, he had been desperate to prove his worth, saying yes to anyone who was willing to sign a check. But not all money is good money. Investors bring more than capital. They bring expectations, pressures, and sometimes conflicting visions. In his comeback journey, he learned to align with investors who believed in the long-term mission, not just quarterly returns. This filtered approach gave him breathing room to experiment, to pivot when necessary, and to prioritize substance over optics. It also taught him the art of saying no, a powerful skill that had been absent in his first attempt. Perhaps the deepest change, however, was his attitude toward failure itself. Before, failure had been something to outrun, to hide from, to deny in public. After his collapse, he embraced it openly. He gave talks about what went wrong. He wrote blog posts dissecting the meltdown. He admitted fault to employees, mentors, and even competitors. This radical transparency did something unexpected. It earned him respect. By owning his mistakes, he reclaimed control over the narrative. Instead of being the entrepreneur who failed, he became the entrepreneur who learned. In American business culture, that shift is profound. People don't just admire success, they admire honesty, courage, and the ability to stand back up. His openness turned former critics into allies. The second company, though in a similar industry, looked and felt different. It wasn't about chasing trends. It was about solving a real problem that customers faced, and solving it in a way that made their lives genuinely easier. This time, he listened, truly listened to users. In the first company, feedback was often brushed aside in the rush to scale. In the second, feedback became gospel. He created systems to capture customer voices, analyze pain points, and refine solutions iteratively. What emerged was not a shiny, overhyped product, but a tool that people didn't just want, but needed. That difference, the shift from ego-driven creation to service-driven innovation, was the heartbeat of his comeback. Leadership also took on new meaning. In the failed startup, he had worn the mask of the untouchable CEO, confident, decisive, unwilling to show weakness. That facade cracked under pressure. This time, he embraced vulnerability. He encouraged employees to challenge his ideas, welcomed dissent in meetings, and fostered an environment where admitting mistakes was not punished but celebrated. The result was a culture of trust. Team members felt invested, not just in a paycheck, but in a shared mission. In many ways, the company became a living embodiment of resilience, a group of people collectively learning, adjusting, and pressing forward together. One of the pivotal turning points came when the company faced its first crisis. No startup journey is smooth, even the second time around. A competitor launched a cheaper product with aggressive marketing. In the past, panic might have led to rash decisions, slashing prices, rushing new features, or diverting focus. But this time, he leaned on resilience. He gathered his team, acknowledged the threat, and asked hard questions. What do we do best? What do customers truly value? Where can we double down instead of scatter? That crisis became a test of the new mindset. Instead of being derailed, the company came out stronger, proving that resilience is not the absence of problems, but the ability to navigate them with clarity. Financial discipline was another cornerstone. During the first startup, funds flowed freely. Lavish office spaces, expensive marketing campaigns, and rapid hiring were justified as necessary to look like a serious company. The collapse exposed how dangerous that illusion was. In the comeback, he instilled frugality without stinginess. Every dollar had a purpose, every hire a clear role, every campaign a measurable outcome. Investors appreciated this discipline, and employees respected the focus. It created a lean machine that could weather storms instead of a fragile empire that toppled under pressure. On a personal level, resilience reshaped his identity. Failure had once made him doubt his worth, but rebuilding taught him that identity cannot be tied solely to external outcomes. He developed habits of reflection, journaling each week about what worked, what failed, and what he learned. He sought mentors who had walked similar paths and absorbed their wisdom. He invested in his own health, recognizing that resilience isn't just mental but physical and emotional. These personal practices bled into his leadership style, making him not just a better entrepreneur, but a more grounded human being. As the company began reaching milestones, profitable quarters, expanding teams, new partnerships, the media noticed again. But this time the narrative was different. They didn't describe him as a prodigy or a wonder. They described him as resilient, as someone who had been tested by fire and come out refined. That framing was more powerful than any praise he had received in his early days. The world loves a comeback, and he embodied it fully. His story began inspiring not just entrepreneurs but anyone facing setbacks. Students struggling with grades, athletes recovering from injuries, professionals navigating career detours. Resilience, after all, is universal. The billion-dollar valuation, when it finally came, wasn't the climax of his story, but a validation of the principles he had lived by. Investors celebrated, employees cheered, headlines blared, but he knew the true victory wasn't in the number. The true victory was in the mindset, the ability to transform failure into fuel. That mindset would outlast any market cycle, any competitor, any valuation. It was a skill he could carry into every future venture, every challenge, every chapter of life. For those watching, there are actionable takeaways in this journey. First, failure is not an indictment of your character, it's feedback about your strategy. Separate the two. Second, resilience is built in the aftermath of collapse, not in the absence of it. Don't waste your failures. Study them until they reveal their lessons. Third, build with humility. Ego may win headlines, but humility builds legacies. Fourth, treat resilience as a team sport. Surround yourself with people who challenge you, support you, and share the mission. Finally, remember that resilience is not about returning to where you were, it's about moving beyond, carrying wisdom that can't be learned any other way. In American culture, stories like this resonate because they mirror the national ethos of reinvention. From pioneers to immigrants to modern entrepreneurs, the narrative of falling and rising again runs deep. But beyond culture, it speaks to the human condition. We all fail, we all stumble, and we all face the choice. Let failure define us, or let it refine us. The entrepreneur in this case study chose refinement, and in doing so proved that resilience is not just a trait but a strategy that can turn even the ashes of defeat into the foundation of billion-dollar success. Looking back, he often remarked that the first startup was not truly a failure. It was tuition. It was the cost of an education that no classroom could provide. The pain of losing everything was the price he paid to gain wisdom he could never have acquired otherwise. And in hindsight, that tuition was worth every penny, because without it, the second venture would never have thrived. This perspective is key. Resilience reframes failure, not as waste, but as investment. That mental shift is what allows people to try again without fear, to risk again with wisdom, and to build again with conviction. As his story continues, it reminds us that resilience is not a one-time act, but a lifelong practice. Markets will shift, industries will evolve, and personal challenges will emerge. The question is never whether difficulty will come, it's how we will meet it when it does. For those willing to see failure as feedback, to slow down, to listen, and to rebuild, the possibilities remain endless. The path to a billion-dollar comeback may not be easy, but as this entrepreneur proved, it is possible, and it begins with a resilient mindset. Resilience is not a switch you flip, nor is it a single heroic act in the face of disaster. It is the slow, steady practice of reshaping how you respond to adversity every day. By the time the American entrepreneur we've been following built his billion-dollar company, resilience had become more than just a survival skill. It had become his guiding philosophy for life and leadership. In part 3 of this journey, we explore the practical tools, strategies, and mindset shifts that fueled his long-term success, and more importantly, how you can apply those lessons to your own setbacks, whether they happen in business, relationships, or personal growth. Because resilience, at its core, is not about avoiding failure. It's about transforming failure into a stepping stone towards something greater. Let's begin with perspective. After the collapse of his first company, he came to understand that perspective is everything. At first, failure looked like a dead end, a verdict that he was not cut out for entrepreneurship. But over time, perspective reframed failure as a necessary detour. This shift didn't happen overnight. It came through conscious practice. He began asking himself different questions. Instead of, "Why did this happen to me?" he asked, "What is this teaching me?" Instead of, "What have I lost?" he asked, "What skills have I gained?" These questions rewired his brain to search for lessons instead of dwelling on losses. Anyone can practice this. In the midst of a setback, ask yourself, how can this shape me for the better? The answers won't erase the pain, but they will provide a lens of growth rather than defeat. Another pillar of his resilient mindset was adaptability. The first startup failed partly because of rigidity. He clung to the original vision even as evidence mounted that customers wanted something slightly different. Pride kept him from pivoting. The second time, he embraced adaptability as strength, not weakness. If customer feedback pointed in a new direction, he listened. If market conditions shifted, he adjusted strategies. He came to see adaptability as the engine of resilience. It wasn't about abandoning vision, it was about bending without breaking, evolving without losing integrity. In our own lives, adaptability shows up in countless ways. When a career path closes, are you willing to explore new fields? When a relationship changes, can you grow into a different role? Resilience thrives in those who embrace change rather than fear it. Discipline was the third key. After his collapse, it became clear that resilience isn't just emotional, it's structural. He created daily routines that supported long-term stability. He woke early, exercised, journaled, and prioritized focus time for strategy. These habits weren't glamorous, but they built the foundation for consistent performance. Success, he realized, is not about one big leap, but about thousands of small, disciplined steps. For anyone facing setbacks, discipline acts as a stabilizer. Even when emotions swing wildly, routines provide anchor points. They remind you that progress is possible, one step at a time, even when the destination feels distant. Perhaps the most surprising discovery in his comeback journey was the power of community. In the first company, he had tried to do it all alone, fueled by ego and the belief that leadership meant having all the answers. After failing, he learned that resilience grows in networks of support. He sought mentors who had failed and succeeded. He surrounded himself with peers who challenged his ideas, not just praised them. He built a culture in his second company where collaboration replaced competition. That sense of community created a safety net. When challenges arose, he wasn't carrying the burden alone. For us, resilience often falters in isolation. But when we open ourselves to support, guidance, and honest conversation, we multiply our strength. One vivid example illustrates this point. Midway through building his second company, he faced a product delay that threatened to derail contracts with major clients. In the past, panic might have consumed him, but this time he called on mentors for advice, leaned on his team for solutions, and communicated transparently with customers. The crisis was resolved, not perfectly, but well enough to preserve trust. That experience reinforced his belief. Resilience is magnified when shared. No one bounces back alone, of course. Resilience also required him to confront fear directly. Fear of failure, fear of public judgment, fear of losing everything again. Instead of suppressing fear, he learned to coexist with it. He often described fear as background noise, always present but not controlling the decisions. Through meditation, therapy, and intentional reflection, he found ways to acknowledge fear without bowing to it. This balance made him courageous, not reckless. He didn't ignore risks, but he didn't let risks paralyze him either. In your journey, whatever fear looms over your next step, remember that courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is action in the presence of fear. As the company expanded, resilience became embedded in its DNA. Teams were trained not to hide mistakes, but to analyze them. Leaders were expected to adapt, not cling to outdated methods. The company celebrated not just wins, but lessons learned from failures. This culture made them agile in ways competitors weren't. While others crumbled under pressure, his team thrived because resilience wasn't just his personal trait, it was a shared value. For individuals, the takeaway is clear. Resilience grows strongest when practiced collectively. Surround yourself with people and environments that normalize growth through struggle, not just success. By the time the company reached $1 billion valuation, resilience had transformed from a survival tool into a growth strategy. It was no longer about bouncing back, it was about bouncing higher. Each setback propelled them forward, each challenge deepened their wisdom, and each fear faced built courage. The company's story became a living case study taught in universities and business schools, not just for its financial success, but for its mindset. But what about you? What does this mean for your journey? You don't need to build $1 billion company to practice resilience. You don't need venture capital or media headlines. You need the willingness to learn from failure, to adapt to change, to practice discipline, to lean on community, and to act with courage despite fear. These tools are universal. They apply whether you are starting a business, pursuing a career change, navigating personal struggles, or simply trying to grow into a stronger version of yourself. Here's the call to action. Start today. Think about one setback in your life that still stings. Instead of burying it, revisit it. Ask yourself, what did I learn? What perspective shift could turn this into fuel? Write it down, then commit to one small action that applies that lesson moving forward. Resilience is built through practice, not theory. Take a step now, however small, you'll feel the shift begin. At Think Fresh Daily, our mission is to bring you stories, strategies, and insights that inspire growth through struggle. If this story resonates with you, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who needs encouragement. Because resilience spreads, it multiplies when we share it. And who knows? Your story of bouncing back might be the one that inspires the next $1 billion comeback, or maybe simply the comeback of a life lived with more strength, courage, and purpose. Failure is not final. Resilience is not rare. And your next chapter is waiting to be written, not in spite of your setbacks, but because of them. So take the lesson, take the step, and let resilience become the fuel for your future.